to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today's the start of PCN's Energy Week, and on today's show, we'll discuss energy policy before state government. But first, we're joined by Carter Walker, reporter with VoteBeat. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You wrote last week about how Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate race is heading for a recount. What triggered the recount?
That's right. So under Pennsylvania law, whenever a race is within a half a percentage point margin, it automatically triggers a recount. We've seen this a couple of times in the state since that law went into effect in 2004, and that's the case with the U.S. Senate race now.
The Associated Press had called the race for Republican candidate Dave McCormick just days after the election, and at that time there were roughly about 100,000 votes that were not counted. How did the Associated Press make that determination at that time?
Well, the Associated Press, they look at, and I'm not with the Associated Press, obviously, so I'm just going from my knowledge of their process. They make their calls based on where the votes are outstanding and what the margins typically between the two parties are in those areas. So their data scientists, I suppose, felt confident enough in the race at that time to call it. It's also now been called by Decision Desk HQ in favor of McCormick, which is another election data race calling outlet.
Of those roughly 100,000 votes that were not counted at that time, assuming those are provisional and overseas ballots, how many of those are anticipated to not be counted due to perhaps erroneous procedures in filling it out, wrong dates, things like that?
Yeah. The bulk of them are provisionals. Like I said, Decision Desk HQ is another outlet that tracks this kind of thing. As of this morning, they say there's about 23,000 left now. 18 and a half of those are provisionals. And provisionals, they have a lot of the same rules that the mail ballots do. They need to be dated and signed. And so not having one of those can disqualify it. Additionally, provisional ballots, they get filled out by anybody who claims that they have the right to vote, and that gets adjudicated later. So perhaps somebody went to their wrong polling place and they filled out a provisional ballot, that wouldn't be counted. Maybe they insisted they're registered, but they're actually not registered to vote, so that isn't counted. So not all 18,000 of those are going to be counted.
Dave McCormick had taken some legal action. Where is this issue regarding the counted or uncounted votes and use of erroneous, misfilled out ballots in the courts right now?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of new court action on this issue, particularly, again, around the mail ballots and the dates on those envelopes. There have been a number of counties, mostly in the southeast region of Pennsylvania, that have decided to count undated or misdated mail ballots, seemingly in contradiction to a recent Pennsylvania Supreme Court order saying that that rule wouldn't be in effect for this election. But so we've seen the McCormick campaign sue Philadelphia for making that decision, as well as Bucks County, and that's working its way through the courts. The RNC and the PA GOP also filed a King's Bench, which is an emergency application for the PA Supreme Court to hear this issue and direct counties not to count those ballots. The PA Supreme Court hasn't really been favorable to King's Bench petitions this election cycle, so it's not really clear that one will go through. Plus, I think most counties have probably made their decision at this point on whether or not to count those ballots. So it's probably more likely that we're going to see that play out through the county court process.
Regarding the recount, will votes need to be recounted by hand, or are there other procedures utilized to differentiate from how votes were counted on Election Day?
Yeah, that's going to depend from county to county. The law says that they just have to count it by a different method than it was originally counted on Election Day. So I know, for instance, in Chester County, they label their machines A, B, C, and D, and put them in boxes with those labels so that they know if they do a recount, okay, rerun the ballots from machine D on machine A, so that it goes through a different counting method. Some counties do count by hand. That's just going to depend on what the county election director wants to do.
What do recount efforts cost, and who foots the bill?
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania Department of State is estimating that this one is going to cost $1 million, and the counties will pay that up front, and then the state will reimburse them for that. I think they said last time as well, when we recounted the Senate race, the Senate primary, Republican primary in 2022, which McCormick was also one of the candidates, that did cost just over $1 million. So it's probably likely to be in that range.
What is the deadline for the recount to be completed?
Yeah, so the recount has to start by this Wednesday. has to be completed by, I believe it would be next Tuesday, the 26th. And counties have to get their results to the secretary on the 27th, which again, I think that would be next Wednesday. And, I should note that a lot of the reporting that we've done and some studies that other folks out there, particularly a organization called Fair Vote, have done, shows that recounts very rarely change the outcome of a race. We've had 7 times that this 5% rule has been triggered in Pennsylvania. 4 of those actually went to a recount, none of which changed the outcome. And Fair Vote, the organization I mentioned, studied more than 7,000 races across the country, 36 of which went to a recount, and only 3 of those, where the margin was very, very slim, did it actually change the outcome.
Carter Walker, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break.
PCN is Pennsylvania history and culture. From the founding of our nation to the struggle for freedom and equality. Listen to the words of authors as they discuss Pennsylvania and the people, places, and events that relate to the Commonwealth. Celebrate our diversity, embrace the past as we look to the future, and be a part of building our nation. PCN is Pennsylvania history and culture.
PCN is Pennsylvania Politics and Policy. PCN is Pennsylvania History and Culture. PCN is Pennsylvania Sports. PCN is everything Pennsylvania.
Welcome back. Our guests today are Representative Greg Vitali and Senator Cameron Bartolotta. Senator Bartolotta, we'll start with you. Now that the election is passed, how do you expect a new presidential administration to impact energy and environmental policy in Pennsylvania?
Well, I know that the Trump administration and his whole entire campaign, as well as Dave McCormick's campaign, was highly focused on energy independence, energy production, knowing that Pennsylvania is the second largest producer of natural gas in the whole country, and knowing that we could and should be producing 4 times what we can right now to make us energy independent for national security. I know that this is going to be a huge priority with the administration coming in, and I'm thrilled to see it.
Representative Vitali, similar question to you.
Yeah, climate change is the issue of our time. I mean, scientists tell us we need to reach carbon neutrality by mid-century to avoid the worst effects of climate change. We have seen its devastation already, most recently with Hurricanes Milton, Helene, wildfires, the prevalence of wildfires. And President Trump calls climate change a hoax, which is ridiculous. The scientists tell us that 2024 is expected to be the hottest year in recorded history. And in fact, this year may reach that 1.5 Celsius degree increase over industrial times, which climate scientists tell us we have to avoid. Trump's mantra is drill, baby, drill. He just appointed an energy secretary who's the head of a gas company. Trump will be an absolute disaster. We simply need to shift in a much greater speed from fossil fuels to renewables, nuclear, and other non-carbon emitting sources of power. I mean, Trump will be simply an absolute disaster for those who believe in science and those who understand the severity of climate change.
Representative, if I can come back to you for a second, on a statewide basis, the legislature is once again, Republicans will lead the Senate, Democrats will lead the House. How does that affect what kind of policy, particularly environmental or energy policy, goes through state government?
Not good. I think the dynamic this current term that is just ending was not good to move important environmental legislation. We tried to move the press bill out of my committee, which would increase the amount of electricity that electric distribution companies like PECO and PPL and so forth get to renewable sources. That would require 35% renewables by 2035. We couldn't move that bill because of the one vote slim majority in the House, and some members like Frank Burns, for example, from Cambria County, who just couldn't take that vote. But even if we did, and I hate to say this, and no disrespect to you, Senator, but the Senate is really an impediment to good climate change legislation, to the promotion of renewable energy. I mean, the governor is on board. The House has that slim majority and could be on board. But getting things done like that press bill with regard to renewable energy, getting the PACER bill, which is sort of the Pennsylvania version of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which would put a cap and trade system in place for the generators of electricity, those who generate electricity using coal and natural gas. That is something that is really not moving in the legislature. So in short, we will have next term sort of the same political dynamic with the same division of House and Senate members, the same division and between Democrat and Republican. So not good. Not good is what I would say. I know a leader must be a dealer in hope, as Confucius might say, but it's hard. It's hard to be too hopeful.
Senator?
Absolutely. Well, we're blessed to have fossil fuels to help combat climate change and the things that it creates across the globe. For one, thankfully, we have natural gas in Pennsylvania, which with its abundance has reduced our carbon footprint in Pennsylvania by over 44%. We also are fortunate that things like coal and natural gas can fuel and energize all the countries around the world who desperately need it to keep the lights on, to keep hospitals running, to facilitate transportation of vehicles, of all of those things that make civilization possible, and the health and welfare of every citizen on the globe. We have third world countries right now who are not benefiting from things like natural gas and coal. They're using dung to burn, to cook their food indoors and for heat, which is a disgusting and horrific medical situation for these individuals. So in order to lift people up in civilization and provide for the things that give us longevity of life and cleaner environments, we need to rely on fossil fuels for now. If we actually had some kind of a different sort of energy to provide for all of the things that we need to keep life sustainable, that would be phenomenal. We don't have that right now. How many windmills does it take to make a windmill? You need steel. You need petrochemicals to make the blades, which are not renewable, you can't. They're burying them in huge pits. That's not great for the environment. We're not quite there yet. I'm all for nuclear energy. I think that's phenomenal. It's one of the best, most reliable, cleanest energies we have out there. But again, trying to get things like that across the finish line are almost impossible. So we absolutely must rely on what we have right now, and we need to be investing in the research and development that has facilitated a change in using fossil fuels to some of the cleanest available. The gas industry has shown over 10 years what they're capable of doing with investment in research and development. And we should be exporting freedom around the world. We could be providing this incredible resource, liquid natural gas, to many different countries that are relying on Russia, for example, and China for coal. We're shipping coal to China, whose regulations for clean air are almost non-existent. How is that keeping the environment safe? and clean. When we have it produced and used and producing energy in America, it is some of the cleanest burning coal around the planet. We don't share in the air with outer space. It comes around to America from China all the time. We breathe that air. If we want a cleaner environment, we should be producing energy right here in America with the resources we have right under our feet, especially from Pennsylvania.
If I can just respond in two ways to that. First of all, I think Pennsylvania ranks either 45th or 48th, depending on how you slice it, in its renewable energy production and use. We are not producing sufficient qualities of wind and solar, even though we have the capacity to do that. So we are failing relative to other states with regard to that, and we ought to be doing a lot more, but those efforts are being blocked in many ways, failing to increase the renewable energy portfolio standard, failing to enact RGGI, failing to enact community solar. So we're not doing our job there relative to other states around us who are. The second point with regard to natural gas, although when it is combusted, it is cleaner than coal. If you look at one, you're not going to drill your way out of the climate problem because natural gas, even though it emits less CO2 when combusted with coal, also has a methane emission problem. Methane, which is the chief component of natural gas, leaks every step of the way from the wellhead to the burner tip on your stove. And methane is a greenhouse gas much more powerful than CO2, although its staying power, its shelf life is shorter. So you're simply not going to drill your way with natural gas. I understand I'm not one of those people who say ban fracking. But what I am saying is that we are not moving at a fast enough rate transitioning from coal, natural gas, oil to cleaner sources of energy.
It's been 20 years since the Marcellus Shale was first drilled. What impact has that had in Pennsylvania?
163,000 jobs have been coming from the gas industry. We also know with exit polling, CNN did an exit poll, and 55% of Pennsylvanians agreed and support the expansion of natural gas, knowing that it's getting with this the inflation that everyone experienced over the last 3.5 years. It was hard to put food on the table. I have seniors taking their medication maybe every other day or splitting their medication in half. People are hurting. People are struggling. And with this threat that Governor Shapiro constantly puts over the heads of industry and manufacturing in Pennsylvania with RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which when he was campaigning before the building trades would say, oh, no, we shouldn't be in it. And then to the environmentalists, he would say, absolutely, we need to be in it. Then he said, let's leave it up to the legislature. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania declared, as we said all along in the Republican caucus, it's unconstitutional. It should be left up to the legislature. And Governor Shapiro had said all along, let's leave it up to them. Then he appealed it. So appeals could last for years. There is no predictability in the production of energy in Pennsylvania. We are missing out on billions of dollars of capital investment. With the increase in data centers and AI now coming online, we're going to be missing the boat on all of those things. And the demand for energy just over the last 5 years increased by 48%. That's before AI. That's before data centers everywhere. We absolutely have to take a look at how we can produce energy efficiently, effectively, reliably, predictably, cheaply, and cleanly. And with the natural gas that we have right under our feet in Pennsylvania, we should be looking to that. There are so many issues with methane, but they come from abandoned and orphaned wells across Pennsylvania, and that's responsibility of the government of Pennsylvania. And I'm, slightly encouraged to see that's make 200 and maybe out of 200,000 abandoned wells have been capped in the last several years. We have a long way to go to doing that. But the methane emissions from the gas drilling, they have monitors on every single foot of pipeline, every aspect, every stage. Every molecule is a commodity for the gas industry. They're not just pumping it into the air. They're very diligent about making sure there aren't any leaks. So that's just one aspect of it. But the issue for the natural gas and for coal in Pennsylvania, we should be looking at that. We should be looking to it because now we finally passed legislation in Pennsylvania that will set up the groundwork for carbon capture and sequestration in Pennsylvania. We just set the groundwork. That is a reality. That is definitely a reality. I have had numerous companies come before me in my offices. I've toured facilities where they can capture carbon, sequester it. There's a company in West Virginia right now who I just visited with, and with waste coal, with coal slurry, they can turn that into products, into chips, into airplane components, all sorts of things. We can clean the environment by using fossil fuels to do so. And until we're able to produce the things that we need, windmills and solar panels and things, solar panels come from China. Okay, they have metals in them, they have chemicals in them that destroy the earth underneath. We need to do better. We need to learn more and do some more research with these things. Plus, in Pennsylvania, we have an average of 52 days of sunshine a year. Solar panels are not the only way to provide the energy that we need.
I want to step back for just a moment, then Representative, I'll let you respond. Senator, you mentioned carbon capture technology. A bill was approved alongside the budget in July. For those that aren't familiar, can you just briefly explain how does that technology work? What does that do?
Well, it lays the groundwork. That was Senator Yaw's bill 831, and we got that across the finish line. It merely lays a framework. It doesn't tell people how to do it, but it establishes a framework. And I'm working with an individual right here in southwestern Pennsylvania who has technology to do just that, to capture the CO2 emissions from using coal in a coal-fired power plant and use that CO2 in different ways. You can sequester it underground. You can utilize it in different ways. There are massive greenhouses around the world that use CO2 piped in to help their plants grow. CO2 is something that we deal with on a regular basis. It's 0.4% of the environment, I believe. I could be wrong, don't quote me. But there are technologies out there right now that are burgeoning, and we need to look at those technologies to do what we can to capture and sequester and utilize CO2. Get it out of the atmosphere. We're fine with that. But we can't completely cut off our nose to spite our face and pretend we can rely on renewables when you need fossil fuels to actually create them in the first place.
Representative?
Yeah, kind of a couple of things. One, I think our legislature is failing in regulating the oil and gas industry. One, the DEP's oil and gas program is understaffed, so there's really not sufficient boots on the ground to enforce existing rules and regulations. Two, we've really taken away the Department of Environmental Protection's ability to increase bonding amounts for conventional wells. And because those wells are inadequately bonded, they continue to be abandoned. So this idea that we are, capping 200 wells when we have 350,000 uncapped, more wells are being currently abandoned because of lack of DEP staffing and bonding than are being capped by the small amount of money we're getting to do that. I mean, we're not stopping the illegal spreading of roadside brine from oil and gas production, which contains radioactive materials. Our setback requirements for well pads is totally inadequate as compared to what the grand jury suggested. So across the board, I think the conventional drilling industry has kind of gotten political hold of our Pennsylvania legislature and is preventing proper regulation of it. With regard to the regional greenhouse gas initiative, that is something that is a successful program. 11 other states do it. They have successful results in reducing CO2 emissions from the generation sector. I mean, to say that it should be left up to the legislature is to say it simply shouldn't be done, because we have a legislature which has demonstrated its inability and its irresponsibility in addressing climate change. The PACER, which is sort of the Pennsylvania version of RGGI, is the governor's attempt to do that. And I do understand there are competing political interests that must be negotiated. I know that labor is not supportive of that, and that's not a good thing. With regard to carbon capture and sequestration, I understand that experts tell us that hydrogen needs to be part of the climate solution, and that when you use natural gas to produce hydrogen, you have to capture the CO2. But I have real concerns about the technology, the carbon capture technology, whether it can be done at scale, and honestly, with regard to using carbon capture for coal, that's just not feasible, because carbon capture is an expensive technology, and right now coal can't compete with natural gas. So if you add the expense of the carbon capture component to that, it even makes it more uncompetitive. With regard to the days of sunshine in Pennsylvania and the amount of wind, we have many solar developers in the queue, businessmen who feel, and women who feel they can make a go of solar development, but they are stuck in the PGM queue, the queue that allows these projects to be hooked up to the grid. There's no problem from a sunshine or wind perspective from the expansion of wind and solar. It's just a matter of political will. I mean, the fossil fuel interests view wind and solar as competing resources that will take away their profits, and we've been getting a lot of resistance fighting that. But I mean, if you really care about the future of the planet, your grandchildren and children and so forth, I mean, we really need to address climate change, and you do that by transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy at a much faster rate than we're doing now.
We're going to take a quick pause in our discussion to give our guests a break and look at what's coming up on PCN. Tomorrow on the PCN Capitol Preview, we'll take a look at Pennsylvania's energy grid with Terry Fitzpatrick from the Energy Association of Pennsylvania and Rob Altenberg from Penn Future. They're here tomorrow morning live at 9 o'clock. With holiday shopping about to go into high gear, scammers and frauds are out there trying to figure out ways to separate you from your money. Avoiding holiday scams is the topic on this month's edition of Focus on Aging Adults with Mary Bach from the AARP of Pennsylvania and Deputy State Attorney General John Abel. That's Wednesday at 7 p.m. Right after that, On the Issues keeps the focus on energy with Andrew Tabler, president and co-founder of Drake Energy Security Forum, and Hind Kars, a fellow co-founder of the Drake Energy Security Forum and tourism director at the Clarion County Economic Development Corporation. They're here Wednesday night at 8:30. Journalist Roundtable returns with Kate Wang-Pu from Spotlight PA and Rachel McDevitt from State Impact PA. Journalist Roundtable airs Thursday nights at 7. It's time for PIAA Cross Country Championships on PCN. Our coverage of the grid of the girls and boys finals begin with the Single A girls at 7 p.m. on Friday and goes all evening long. For more details about PIAA Cross Country schedule, go to PCNTV.com. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers and donors like you to help achieve its mission. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's return to our discussion on Pennsylvania's energy policy. We're talking specifically about natural gas. Representative Vitali, you mentioned the word setbacks. So I want to bring up something that happened just prior to the election. Cecil Township in Washington County had passed a borough ordinance basically increasing the distance that would be required between drilling sites and schools or our homes. What's the significance of them passing this ordinance?
It sets a very dangerous. I'm sorry, I thought you asked me. I apologize because that's my district. Sorry.
No.
Yes. Okay. Cecil
Feel
Township in
free
my
to
district.
jump in there and I'll respond, Senator.
Okay, great. Sorry. Yeah, Cecil Township is in my district in Washington County, and in that particular municipality, they have a board who's very anti-gas and anti-gas energy, and I get it. However, trying to change the setback to 2,500 feet and then from 5,000 feet, a mile away from any school or a hospital. It's based on a report that was produced from the AG's office and others, and it was a report from Pitt University and some information. But having started college as a biology major and very, very deep into science growing up, my questions to them were, what was your control? What was your control study on? And there wasn't one. I said, well, you have Peters Township. They don't allow drilling. You have Pittsburgh. They don't have allow drilling. How would you compare any of the environmental issues going on? In southwestern Pennsylvania, we have a ton of agriculture. We have loads of agriculture going on. And even our DEP said that the results of that were not based on scientific discovery. It was flawed. Even our own DEP said that. So it's basically a function of eliminating any drilling in that particular municipality, and it sets a very dangerous precedent because it eliminates people's ability to control how they utilize their very own property that they own. And it also is based on information that was flawed, even stated by our own DEP. So I think it's something that the citizens should really take a good look at. And understand that this is just a mission to eliminate completely the drilling in that area, which is fine. And thereby, Senator Yaw and I have legislation that states, if you choose as a municipality to eliminate any type of drilling in your entire municipality, then you also do not benefit from the Act 13 funding. It's basically an impact tax on drilling in around that area. So, I mean, to me, it's like the story of the little red hen. If you keep saying no, I'm not going to help produce whatever, then you shouldn't be at the table sharing the benefits of that particular production.
Yeah, no, I was encouraged by Cecil County and showing concern for the environment, showing
It's a township, it's not a county. Sorry, just clarifying.
Concern for the people of their district. I mean, what you're talking about is setback distances from schools where children are, and hospitals, and right now the setback requirement is only 500 feet, and then there have been health studies to show the deleterious impacts of being close to drilling sites. 500 feet is just too close. I mean, these figures were based on the grand jury report convened by the Attorney General, and I understand that they are not scientists, but there is an understanding that 500 feet is simply too close to these places where vulnerable populations are. So, I salute the township for what they've done, and I'm sure it'll be contested by the drilling industry, which seems to contest every other reasonable regulation. But we'll see how it pans out. We had similar legislation introduced by Representative Frialaten this term. We did some public hearings on it, or at least one public hearing on it. So, I'm not sure where the science precisely comes down as far as footage goes, but I do know that 500 feet is too close.
How does the state hold rulers accountable when there are incidences of, for example, water contamination?
Well,
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I will say, there are fines implemented, but I think one of the overarching problems is that we have a Department of Environmental Protection that is intentionally understaffed, under-resourced by our legislature, and they are not given the tools to fully inspect waterways, fully and engage in enforcement actions. So when violations are in fact found or to enforce, so we have an intent. It's sort of analogous to, in the federal government, to keeping the Internal Revenue Service underfunded so that tax laws can't be fully enforced. It's the same in Pennsylvania. The DEP, its staffing is down from when it had full employment around 2003, 2004. And it's been one of those things in our budget that is done budget cycle after budget cycle. The typical trade-off is that the Democrats get more money for basic ed, and the Republicans, get things that are not helpful to the environment.
Representative, if I could come back to you for just a second. In 2020, then Attorney General Josh Shapiro had released a grand jury report that concluded the Department of Environmental Protection failed to protect public health from ill effects of natural gas drilling. Why haven't many of these recommendations been put into place now that Governor Shapiro oversees DEP?
Well, I think that, you have a legislature that is not sympathetic to environmental interests at all. And I think that, the governor can do only so much. But I think that it's getting proper legislation through is very difficult when you have the conservative Senate we do and the narrow majority in the House that we do. Getting proper staffing for the DEP is one of those subjects of budget negotiations. Environmental regulations are challenged at every turn.
I'll add, in Pennsylvania, we have possibly the most strict regulations in the entire country. We as legislators, and I'll correct you just a little bit. The Republican senators don't hate the environment, and we're not doing all we can to throw roadblocks in it. We have children, we have grandchildren, we live here, we have constituents who live here. We take very seriously the health and welfare of the people that we represent. When it comes to the DEP and your comment about them not having enough funding to send people out to do inspections, I have a constituent in my district who 2 years ago, and it's a gas drilling company, they had a visit from an inspector over 400 times in 1 year. That's more than once a day. So I'm thinking if they've got someone who's got enough time on their hands to come and do an inspection more than once a day for a year, possibly that individual might spend some time going to other sites to do inspections. So I don't know that it's necessarily lacking funding and lacking time and not enough resources. There also was at least some advances made in the DEP, because when I was first elected in 2014, I insisted on having meetings with the Secretary of DEP every 6 to 8 weeks, whether in face-to-face or on the phone, because where I am Marcellus Shale Central, that's hard to say. Also, the coal industry is very, very, very prevalent in my district, Greene County and Washington County and a little bit of Beaver County. So my mission was to make sure I was sitting down with the Secretary of DEP and going through all of the issues, any problems that they foresee, making sure there wasn't redundancy, making sure there wasn't retribution on different industries, and being sure that things were done the proper way. And one of the first things I learned was that we were saying, well, why don't you have electronic filing? Why don't you have electronic filing for these permits and things? Make it a little more streamlined, make it more advanced. And I was told, oh, we have electronic filing. I said, oh, well, how does that work? You can click on a link on the website for the DEP and print out your application. That is not an electronic filing process by any means. So I'm very encouraged to see that they've at least moved a little bit more forward. They send iPads or tablets out with their folks that go in the field nowadays, so that they can enter everything instantly, which takes a lot less time than writing it all down, going back to the office, whatever day you go to the work, and filling it out. It's been baby steps, but it has been beneficial to do some upgrades in the Department of Environmental Protection. So we have kids here, we live here, and we have constituents here. So our goal is to make sure that our air and water and land is clean. And again, I'll repeat: you can't have green energy without fossil fuels, and you can't have advancements in protecting the environment and climate without the use and benefit of those particular kinds of fuels.
Before we run out of time, if I may, I want to just shift our focus briefly and talk about the electricity grid. PJM Interconnection, which operates the grid in 13 states, said that we are likely to run out of electricity generated capacity by the end of the decade. Why are we unable to keep up with our electricity needs?
Well, I think it's a combination of increasing demand due to data centers, the increase in data centers, the shifting to electricity, for example, with electric vehicles and heating. So there's this increase in demand over time. And then you have plants that are retiring, coal plants, for example, that are coming offline. So it's a combination of those two things. It's a serious problem. It has to be addressed. We talked about having these long queues, taking for example, a solar project has to wait 6 years in line before it can hook up to the grid to supply power. That's a problem that needs to be addressed. I mean, I think part of that involves more transmission lines, which are difficult things to site, so that it's easier for these projects to hook into the grid. But it's a serious problem that is being struggled with now. The Pennsylvania Utility Commission is conducting meetings to discuss this. I've had PJM testify at a number of my hearings. There's certainly the recognition of the problem, but there's not the sufficient speed to deal with it.
There are some states, not including Pennsylvania, that have climate policies that give preference to alternative energy sources over the traditional fossil fuels that have typically powered these electricity generating stability. How do they compare in terms of stability of the grid, and looking forward, do you see Pennsylvania moving in that direction? Senator, we'll start with you first.
We've had PGM at our hearings, and we've asked that question. How would the increase in our renewable portfolio standard affect grid reliability? And they indicate that they will handle the situation as it evolves. They do not see the increased renewable energy in Pennsylvania as affecting grid reliability. In fact, they point to the fact that other states supply a lot more renewable energy to the grid than Pennsylvania does, and there's no reliability problems there. So Pennsylvania can put a lot more wind and solar on the grid without affecting reliability, and in fact should.
Senator?
as far as reliability goes, I mean, I understand, we look at Texas a couple of years ago during a massive storm. We can focus on increasing our renewables, but people need to also understand that to create solar panels, we would like to do that in America. That would be great. But we rely on China for a lot of those materials and these rare earth metals that come from other countries. We would be relying on all of these other countries to provide those things. Also, windmills. And I tell people this all the time. When you compare the amount of energy produced by these different entities, a 5 square acre pad of a producing gas well produces more energy than 5 square miles of windmills. And when these windmills fail, what do you do with them? You can't recycle the blades. And all of those things have to come, the materials that come to produce a windmill or solar panels come from fossil fuels. Even if you don't use fossil fuels for energy, you use them in every single aspect of your life. The computer you're actually looking at to communicate with us right now, Representative, comes from fossil fuels. All of the elements in a home, your paint, your furniture, your carpeting, your car, your clothing, almost everything comes from natural gas in some way or another. So it's not just an aspect of producing energy. These are things that we need to provide civilization and safety and security for people. Medical products, medications, almost everything you see and touch in an operating room comes from fossil fuels in one way or another. So the other thing about Pennsylvania producing the energy for the 11 other states that are included in RGGI, we're the producer of that energy, and they want us to pay for every molecule that goes into the air. Meanwhile, as a private pilot, I know which way the wind blows. It blows from west to east. We border West Virginia and Ohio. They are generating all kinds of energy with their coal-fired power plants right now. And a conversation I had with Governor Shapiro immediately after the train derailment in East Palestine, when you could see that cloud of carbon from space, I said to Governor Shapiro, I said, listen, if we were in RGGI right now, not only would we be paying for every single inch of that area to clean up and trying to make those poor people whole that were devastated by that, but we'd be paying for every single molecule of that carbon in RGGI when it was an event that took place a mile across the border. These are things that we need to consider. These are things that need to be put into the equation. You can't just say, all right, gas and oil and coal, you have to subsidize wind and solar just outright. Just subsidize them at the detriment of what it is they're producing in a cleaner and cleaner way every single year. So I'm all for, let's try everything. Just, let's see what works and what doesn't work, but not at the expense and having other states eat our lunch in RGGI and having the gas and oil industry and the coal industry subsidize other elements of energy production when clearly the market isn't demanding it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. As I've said at the outset, I am not one of those people who are calling for the elimination of gas drilling. I understand that it is part of our future. I might just point out with regard to wind turbines, I've been to wind turbines. I've been to wind turbines that have been leased out on farmlands, and that gives our farmers in Pennsylvania another source of energy and income, rather, without really affecting their ability to farm. So there's a lot of positives to wind. With regard to RGGI, again, the success of other states is a matter of record. Pennsylvania is a major greenhouse gas contributor. It approaches 1% of the world's greenhouse gases. We have a moral responsibility to do more. And part of that is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from our power sector. Now, the legislation, the so-called PACER legislation, which Governor Shapiro proposes, would drive back from the revenues of these auctions in RGGI to rate reduction, to projects which would promote worker training, energy. I think that it's something that if it can't be done by the legislature, perhaps our Pennsylvania Supreme Court, when it finally rules on this, will allow it to move forward because it.
Unfortunately, that will have to be the last word. Representative Greg Vitali and Senator Cameron Bartolotta, thank you both for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for including me. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Earlier, PCN spoke with Pennsylvania state climatologist Kyle Imhoff about his job and the climate's relationship to energy.
Kyle Imhoff, Pennsylvania state climatologist, welcome to our program. For those who may not be familiar, what is the role of the state climatologist?
So the State Climate Office, we're housed within Penn State University. So we have a research branch and an outreach branch. So we partake in research activities related to collecting historical weather information and real-time weather information and distributing it to whatever sector is interested in that information. So we house this data here. We have a website where we display all that information, and anybody can access that across any sector. The general public can access that at any time. And the outreach part of this is media interviews like this one, speaking engagements all across the Commonwealth, again, different industries, whether it's agriculture, transportation, emergency management, you name it. We try to get out there and speak to how climate and weather impacts everybody's lives on a daily basis.
What kind of people use the information you gather and find it helpful?
All sorts. And in fact, we always get data requests even from anybody that's interested in weather information. So it could be something as simple as somebody's looking for weather data for a specific day or time for curiosity's sake, or it could be somebody like state police, for instance, may be interested in what was the weather at this specific time. Was there lightning strikes at this exact location because it may have caused a house fire? So all sorts of different ways that you can utilize this information. PennDOT may be looking for, was there a snow squall that may have caused an accident, or how could we have warned the public in a quicker manner or more easily so that we can avoid some of these major pileups that we sometimes see on the interstate? So it really can vary widely across different sectors to what you can use this weather and climate data for.
Does every state have a climate office or just Pennsylvania?
Every state, primarily, we actually have all states except one has a sanctioned state climate office in our national organization, the American Association of State Climatologists. We recognize all states that have a state climate office and an appointed state climatologist. So just about every state has one, but we're still working on a couple of states that are still working on getting a state climatologist. But essentially, all states have one. It just the variability is really whether they're housed within university settings, like here in Pennsylvania, or if a lot of them are actually in state agencies, so they're actually state government positions. So that's one of the primary differences across states.
What is your process for measuring the climate and keeping track of it?
So we want to try to get the most accurate, the most reliable weather information we can. So we collect all existing weather networks across the state. Here in Pennsylvania, at least that's what we're focused on. But we want to try to capture all of the information we can that we know is what we call quality controlled and quality assured, meaning that all of the sensors go through calibration processes. There are people that actually go out physically to the stations and where the instruments are located to make sure they're up to the highest quality standards that we have, the industry standard that we measure everything by. So we want to make sure that those stations are reliably reporting and accurately reporting. And then what we do is we take all of that information, we gather it, we aggregate it, we do trend analyses to see how things have changed over decades, sometimes centuries, if we're fortunate enough to have stations that have reported for a long enough period of time. Now that we're in the satellite era in meteorology, so satellites really became prominent in meteorology around the late 70s, early 80s. So now we have several decades, 30, 40, 50 years of satellite data where we can now fill in some of the gaps where we didn't have weather stations at the surface, but now we can measure what's happening across the entirety of the atmosphere and at the surface using satellite information. So we're capturing all of that data and then trying to scientifically interpolate and extrapolate what kind of information we can glean about how the weather and the climate is changing over time.
What trends have you spotted in Pennsylvania's climate throughout your time serving in this role?
So I think the most striking trend that I've seen since I've started working here is the heavy rainfall trend that we've seen across much of the northeastern United States. It's not just Pennsylvania, but we're seeing a lot more what we call extreme or heavy rainfall events, meaning the way we usually define that is you would get at least an inch, and depending on the scenario, sometimes up to 2 inches of rainfall within a 24-hour period. So you get some sort of really intense rainfall over a short period of time. And obviously that's important because that can lead to flash flooding or river flooding events, and that can have impacts across the state. So that's really the biggest trend I've seen is we've seen almost depending on the study and depending on the research you look at, it's upwards of 70 to 75% increases in the number of days per year where we get these really heavy rainfall events. So that's been an extraordinary trend. And that was measured over the past 50 to 100 years. So that's a really stark contrast to what we used to see with now how many heavy rainfall events we see.
When energy policy is brought up on the House or Senate floor, are you or anyone questioned about how the climate would impact the energy and vice versa?
Not specific to what's talked about in necessarily DC or even the state legislature, but we do get utility companies that are asking for weather information so that they try to make sure that everything is as efficient as possible from an energy perspective. So they're interested in how is the weather changing that can impact energy industry, and ways in which that can happen is if you think about during the summer months, if you don't cool down as much at night, and this is one of the trends we're seeing is generally warmer nighttime low temperatures. So we don't get as cool at night as we used to during the summer months specifically. So you figure if we don't get as cool at night, that's going to increase the demand on air conditioning at night. And so you're keeping your AC on for longer, and it's having to kick on longer depending on what you have your thermostat set at. And so that's an energy demand right there. And then of course in the winter months, while we haven't seen as much extreme cold as maybe we used to see back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but that can also have an impact as well. If we do get a really cold snap, in fact, a couple of years ago, just before the holidays, we had a really extreme cold snap, and that was of course high on energy demand, and we had problems with potentially having to shut the power off in certain situations in those scenarios. So we still are susceptible to extreme cold, and that has its own energy challenges. But that's really what we're seeing is these warming trends. How is that impacting the energy demand? And it's really during the summer months we've seen an increase in this demand over the overnight hours.
Kyle Imhoff, Pennsylvania State climatologist, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That concludes today's show. Join us for tomorrow's episode of the PCN Capitol Preview. We'll discuss Pennsylvania's energy grid with Terry Fitzpatrick from the Energy Association of Pennsylvania and Rob Altenberg from Penn Future. That's tomorrow morning live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.